Hi everyone, I'm MissV. Today I want to share with you the story of a truly legendary figure, a traveler of the spirit world and a scientist, Emanuel Swedenborg. His life was almost like a resume of genius. He came from a privileged background. As a young man, he was granted nobility by the Queen of Sweden, and his father served as an advisor to the king. As a student, he showed extraordinary intelligence, producing bold ideas far ahead of his time, even daring to write about how the infinite could give rise to a finite universe. Later, he became a true scientist, a chemist, geologist, astronomer, physicist, anatomist, biologist, mineralogist, and metallurgist. He earned a reputation of a giant of science. People often compared him with Newton, and some even considered him his equal. His range of knowledge was so vast that few in history could match it. He was also an aviation pioneer, designing flying machine prototypes and writing the very first paper on aviation in human history. He even became an inventor, creating the hovercraft, vacuum pump, and even an automatic piano. He also studied human consciousness, tackling what many call one of the greatest mysteries of the century, exploring the relationship between the brain and mental activity, and eventually pushing humanity's understanding of awareness. If someone had achieved just one of these accomplishments, they would already be considered remarkable, but he nailed them all. He wasn't just a scientist, he was a true polymath. By our logic, that should have made him one of the greatest figures in science, destined to keep pushing the boundaries of knowledge. Yet Swedenborg's path took a shocking turn. At the age of 57, he suddenly devoted himself to theology, claiming he had received a divine mission that he could freely travel into the spirit world and record everything he saw to share with humanity. So, was he the fallen star of science or the chosen prophet of the spirit world? Let's go back to 1745. Swedenborg was 55 years old, sitting in a London restaurant having dinner. The room was dimly lit, the glow of candles flickering across the tables, and people happily chatting as they enjoyed their meals. Then, out of nowhere, a blinding white light burst into his vision, so bright he could barely keep his eyes open. Out of that dazzling glow, a man in a white robe appeared. The figure looked straight at him and said, "Are you ready for your mission? You must deliver a message to humanity. Write down everything you see and hear." And just like that, he vanished. Swedenborg was stunned. His heart raced and his body froze. He immediately turned to the other diners and asked if they had seen what just happened. But they only gave him a puzzled looks. To them, nothing at all had occurred. From then on, Swedenborg discovered he had a very unusual gift. With just his mind, he could let his soul step out of his body and wander through the spirit world, freely talking with spirits. That's when he realized what we call death is simply the consciousness leaving its physical shell. The soul doesn't disappear. With this eye-opening discovery, he made a huge decision. He gave up his scientific work and devoted himself entirely to this new mission. And remember, at that time, Swedenborg wasn't just any scholar. He was already a superstar in the scientific world, mentioned alongside Newton. Soon, rumors started flying. People whispered that Swedenborg had lost his mind, that he had gone completely off the rails. Friends from the scientific community rushed to talk him out of it, hoping he could come back to his senses. But Swedenborg insisted. He told them, "Plenty of people can do science, but this mission only I have been given the ability to carry out." Most people just shook their heads, thinking the great scientist had fallen from grace. They pitied him, believing his career was ruined. But surprisingly, it didn't take long before word spread everywhere. Swedenborg really could cross into the spirit world, and the story that made him famous overnight was the Great Stockholm Fire. One summer evening in 1759, Swedenborg was having dinner at a friend's house in Gothenburg. All of a sudden, he started feeling uneasy, like something terrible was about to happen. He jumped up from his seat and began pacing the room, looking tense. His friends stared at him, puzzled. "What's wrong with you?" Then, like he was in a daze, his soul seemed to leave his body and rush straight to Stockholm. Suddenly, he blurted out, "It's terrible. Stockholm is on fire. My neighbor's house had already burned down, and now the flames are about to reach my own house." The guests around the table were stunned. One of them asked, "How could you possibly know that? Stockholm is 400 kilometers away." Swedenborg just replied calmly, "I can sense things that others cannot see." At the time, the people there were skeptical. No one really believed he had that kind of ability. The next day, the governor called Swedenborg in, wanting to know if his story about the fire was true. Back then, news didn't travel fast. Messages from Stockholm usually took 2 or 3 days to reach Gothenburg. Swedenborg calmly described everything, where the fire had started, how quickly it spread, and how it was finally put out. The governor was still marveling at his words when a sudden knock came at the door. A messenger rushed in, out of breath. "I've come from Stockholm. A massive fire has swept through the city. A third of the city has been destroyed." And later, reports confirmed everything. Driven by strong winds, the flames tore through about 300 houses, leaving 2,000 people homeless. It was a fire unlike anything people had ever seen in a century. And just as Swedenborg had said, the fire stopped only 3 houses away from his own house because of a sudden change in the wind. This left the governor deeply shocked. Swedenborg hadn't just foreseen the fire. He was able to describe every detail of how it happened, and this incident made him famous overnight. Swedenborg's extraordinary ability to cross into the spirit world drew wide attention, even reaching Europe's royal courts. Queen Louise Ulrika of Sweden had always been skeptical about the spirit world and life after death. When she heard that Swedenborg was not only a scientist, but also claimed he could speak with the dead, she decided to meet this legendary figure herself. As soon as Swedenborg entered the palace, the queen put him to the test. "If you truly can do this," she said, "could you bring me a message from my brother, Prince William of Prussia, who has just passed away?" Swedenborg agreed, and at once began his journey into the spirit world, seeking the soul of the prince. Later, Swedenborg walked up to the queen and whispered, "I have brought you your brother's message." The queen's face turned pale. She nearly fainted. He told her that in the spirit world, he had found Prince William. The prince spoke of his longing for her and revealed secrets that only the two of them could have known. The queen was deeply shaken. From that moment on, Swedenborg's reputation in the royal court soared on, and people began to believe he truly could cross into the spirit world. There was another time when a wealthy merchant's widow lost the receipt for a set of very expensive fine china. It was custom-made tea sets, ordered specially by her late husband. She went to the seller, who said her husband had never paid for it, and told her to cover the debt. But the widow knew deep down her husband always paid his bills on time, and she was sure he had already done so before he passed away. The receipt meant a lot to her because the tea set was valuable and irreplaceable. Upset, she talked to a friend, and her friend advised her to go to Swedenborg. So the widow went to find him, asking if he could enter the spirit world and speak with her late husband. Swedenborg agreed to help. He then told the widow that the wealthy merchant had already paid the bill 7 months earlier, and the receipt was hidden in a secret compartment inside the left drawer of her dressing table. The widow was skeptical. She thought to herself, "A secret compartment? I've never even noticed one before." But she decided to check anyway. She pulled open the drawer, and to her shock, there really was a hidden space. Inside lay the receipt, exact as Swedenborg had said. These 3 stories were recorded in documents of the time, and beyond these, there are other versions circulating about his unusual ability. Some claimed he once publicly predicted that a young man would die the very next day, and the man did in fact pass away at that date, leaving everyone stunned. From then on, people began to take Swedenborg's journeys into spirit world much more seriously, and his fame kept rising. Swedenborg once said, "The day we were born and the day we die are already set, unless someone decided to end their own life." And he didn't just say it, he even predicted the exact day he would die. In February 1772, he wrote to John Wesley, the famous preacher. In the letter, he told Wesley that he knew Wesley wanted to meet him, and then added he would die on March 29 that year. He suggested Wesley come to see him before then. Wesley was stunned. He had never reached out to Swedenborg, and he hadn't told anyone about wanting to meet him. So how could Swedenborg possibly know? Even more shocking, Swedenborg really did pass away on March 29, 1772, exactly as he had said. His body was later buried in Uppsala Cathedral. In his final days, some people accused him of writing theology just to get famous. But come on, let's be real. Swedenborg was already one of the most celebrated scientists of the 18th century. Switching to theology didn't boost his reputation. In fact, it put his reputation at risk. And when people challenged whether his words were true, Swedenborg answered calmly, "As truly as you see me before your eyes, so true is everything I've written. I could have said more if it had been allowed. When you enter eternity, you will see it all, and then you and I will have plenty to talk about." During his lifetime, Swedenborg recorded what he claimed to have seen and heard in the spiritual world. He turned those experiences into a book called Heaven and Hell, which became his most famous work. Swedenborg believed that human progress wasn't just about material things, it was also about a spiritual journey. He divided human history into 4 ages: the Golden Age, the Silver Age, the Bronze Age, and finally the Iron Age. In the Golden Age, people's minds were directly in tune with heaven. They starred in correspondences, seeing how everything in the natural world had a spiritual counterpart in heaven. Through this way of thinking, they could freely communicate with God and angels. It was a time of innocence and holiness. Then came the Silver Age. Humanity grew more focused on the material world. People still had spirituality, but their connection to heaven wasn't as strong anymore. By the Bronze Age, those heavenly qualities had almost vanished. People no longer thought in correspondences, and instead cared only about material comfort and sensory pleasures. And in the Iron Age, humanity became completely materialistic. Spiritual awareness was gone, and the link to God was cut off entirely. Swedenborg stressed that even though humans lost direct contact with heaven, the spiritual world never disappeared. It's always there, only now the human mind can't sense it anymore. And when life in this world ends, the soul doesn't vanish. It still has senses. thoughts, memories, and emotions. It only leaves the physical body behind. The soul enters another world where it still has its own form, but the substance it's made of is completely different from earthly matter, as if it exists in a refined spiritual dimension. In other words, what you take with you isn't the body, but everything inside: your memories, your mind, your ability to think, your intuition, and even your deepest emotions. Then what happens after death depends entirely on how you lived your life. Every thought and action in this world is recorded in heaven. Once the body is gone, the soul goes through 3 stages, where it's judged according to the life you lived. In the first stage, the soul has just left the body, but doesn't yet realize it has died. The surroundings look almost identical to the world it knew on earth. Many people feel as if they are still alive, going about their usual activities until they notice strange things happening. They might walk straight through a wall or realize that others cannot see them anymore. This sudden shift leaves the soul confused, as if it has stepped into a world that feels familiar but completely different. It's much like the famous scene in Ghost, where the main character dies but continues to move through the world, unaware at first of what has happened. In some cases, this experience becomes even more vivid. For example, when someone passes away in a hospital bed, the soul's senses grow unusually sharp. It can clearly see and hear the doctors working to save its body, and the soul gradually separates from its body. The physical sensations fade away little by little, yet the soul still keenly retains its vision, hearing, and even touch. In the second stage, the soul gradually realizes that the physical body has died, and the true nature of the soul is revealed. A selfish soul is driven only by desire, caring little for anything else, while a good soul radiates love and compassion. Even the light that shines from each soul is different. Friends and family members who have already passed can recognize you instantly, and in that moment of reunion, many people are brought to tears of joy. Just like in the earthly world, the spiritual world also follows the principle that souls with similar inner states come together, and those two different cannot stay in harmony. But unlike the earthly world, in the spiritual world you cannot hide. Every thought and intention is immediately perceived by others, and everyone can directly know what you are thinking. After the second stage, the soul enters the third stage. This is a state of preparation for the final destination, heaven or hell. Swedenborg explained that not everyone goes through all 3 stages. Some are taken straight into heaven, while others are cast directly into hell. For those who had already completed their inner transformation in earthly life, they are ready for heaven. For them, death is simply the release from the body. At that very moment, angels come and carry them directly into paradise. Swedenborg said he had seen only a very small number of people ascend straight to heaven in this way. On the other hand, those who were deeply malicious in life, hypocritical and cruel, are also taken immediately, but into hell. This leads us to the question of judgment itself. Judgment is not the destruction of the world. Humanity will continue to live and multiply on earth. The true judgment does not take place in the human realm, but in the spiritual realm. And it is not the body that is judged, but the soul, because the body is only a temporary shell. Souls filled with evil are condemned in judgment, while good souls entered a new and beautiful spiritual world. It is not simple belief in God that leads to heaven. What truly guides a soul to heaven or hell is its inner state and the actions taken during earthly life. Those filled with love, who helped others and lived with kindness, they may be led into heaven. In heaven, souls are surrounded by love and goodwill. They enjoy endless joy and harmony, living in a warm and beautiful realm. But those who are very selfish are led into hell. For them, the only things they care about are themselves, or anything related to them, their own children, their own family, but they ignore society, the nation, and the needs of others. Hell is prepared for souls who choose selfishness and hurt others. In hell, the soul experiences endless pain and misery. It cannot escape the choices it once made. Hell is filled with darkness and chaos, where souls are punished for their evil deeds and find no release. Those descriptions are shocking, even confusing, but they are not just a religious imagination. They come from the records of a great scientist. Swedenborg was one of the greatest scientists of the 18th century, but after a mysterious experience, he gave up his fame and achievements and turned to the study of the spiritual world. In his books, he shared many experiences and insights about the spirit world. He revealed that the state of the soul is directly connected to our thoughts and actions in this life. Those records had a deep impact on a society that valued science at the time, and also laid the foundation for later study for spirituality. Today, his works are still preserved in the British Museum. They continue to inspire countless people to reflect on the relationship between spirituality and science, and to understand the essence of life more deeply. So, what do you think? Was he telling heresy, or was it a true story? Share your thoughts in the comments.